20 minutes before the toasts, my son's new wife took me by the elbow, walked me into a service corridor behind the bar, and told me that the only thing I still brought to this family was a signature on a check. Then she told me to leave. Not step outside, leave, and don't come back, and don't make a scene on the way out. I had paid for every square foot of that room, every oyster on every tray, every note that band had played since 6 o'clock. And what she didn't know, standing there in an $11,000 dress with her chin up, was that when I walked out that door, the entire wedding was going to walk out behind me. My name is Amos Waverly. I'm 67 years old and I build wooden boats, which is a thing almost nobody does anymore. I want to tell you this story because I have carried it around for a year and a half now, and I've noticed something. Every time I tell a piece of it to a man my age, he goes quiet in a particular way, like he recognizes it, like somebody's been doing arithmetic on him too, and he hasn't wanted to say it out loud. So let me start where it actually starts. I own 3 acres of shell and mud on the Wando Riverside of Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, Waverly Small Craft. A big open shed with roof panels that let the light down in stripes, a marine railway that still runs, and a dock that reaches deep water even at dead low. I laid my first keel there in 1983. My hands look like the tools I use. You could pick me out of a crowd by the hands alone. I married Clementine in 1981. She died 5 years ago in April, in the bed by the window, with the tide coming in. I was holding her left hand, and I remember thinking that it was the same hand that had signed the loan papers with me when the bank in Georgetown didn't want to talk to us. We raised one son, Nathaniel. Everybody calls him Nate. He's 34. And on the night this story begins, I was standing inside a converted cold storage warehouse on the Charleston Peninsula called the Cistern Works. Black steel, poured concrete, glass, 30-foot ceilings, and the acoustics of a parking garage. My daughter-in-law had chosen it. I stood there in a navy suit I bought for the occasion and felt like a piece of driftwood somebody had dragged inside and set on a plinth. Everything in that room was for the camera. The guests moved past each other in slow orbits. The laughter came a half-second late and went straight up into that ceiling and never came back down. Nobody was eating the food. They were photographing it. I had written the checks for all of it. $580,000. You look like a heron at a dog show, Amos. That's Roosevelt Pinckney. Everybody calls him Rosie. 69 years old, built like a piling, and he runs the best catering outfit between Georgetown and Beaufort oyster roasts. Whole hog, shrimp, and grits people plan a vacation around. Rosie and I have known each other since we were teenagers, pulling crab traps for pocket money out in Awendaw. He stood there in his whites with a towel over his shoulder, watching 140 people ignore his food. Little out of my water, I told him. He made that low sound he makes in his chest. That girl can spend, I'll give her that. He wasn't being cruel. He was being accurate. And I had signed every one of those invoices myself. Across the room, Verna Toussaint was setting her mic back on its stand. Verna is 70, sings contralto. She's been singing in Charleston churches and Charleston barrooms sometimes the same weekend, since 1974. She came over with her hands folded in front of her. Amos, honey, you still want Wade in the water before the cake, or has the committee overruled me? And for the first time all night, something in my chest actually opened up. I want it. Slow. The way Clem liked it, with the organ way down underneath. Verna nodded once, and there were 40 years in that nod. For Clementine, I'd sing it in a courtroom. I need you to understand that song, because the whole night turns on it. It wasn't a performance. Clem used to hum it under her breath in the shed while I was steam-bending oak, and she never even knew she was doing it. I hadn't heard it done right since the funeral. 8 minutes. Out of $580,000, all I wanted was 8 minutes. That's when Sloane came across the room. Sloane Merrick is 31. She moved through that crowd like weather. She wore that dress like a uniform, not a gown. She gave Rosie a nod that didn't reach him, gave Verna one that didn't reach her either, and then she looked at me and put on a smile with nothing behind the eyes. Amos, can I borrow you? Privately. I followed her past the bar and through a swinging door into a service corridor, concrete floor, a rolling rack of folded chairs against one wall. The music came through, that door flattened out and far away. Her smile came off her face like it had been unclipped. What are you doing? I'm not following you. Don't. Her voice dropped and got faster and got hard. The gospel number. Verna. Are you seriously about to turn my wedding into a funeral for your wife? I didn't answer right away. And I want to be honest with you about that pause, because it wasn't shock. I've been surveying boats for 40 years. What I felt in that hallway was the exact thing I feel when I tap a plank with a mallet and the wrong sound comes back at me. Hollow. Soft somewhere underneath. You can look at a hull for a solid year and see nothing wrong with it. Then you tap it once and you know. That was her song, I said. First thing I ever heard her sing. I thought it'd be a kindness. Kindness. She laughed one syllable, nothing in it. Amos, I need you to hear this, because clearly nobody has ever said it to you. Your time is over. It's over. The nostalgia, the boat shed, the stories about the old days. Nobody came here for that. Your value to this family is your bank account, and you've already paid, so we're square. She stepped closer. Thank you for the money. Now go home. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. And my silence started doing something to her that no argument in the world could have done, because she'd walked into that corridor with a script and I would not read my half of it. Are you hearing me? Her voice went up and cracked. Get out. Get out. And don't come back here. You are not welcome in this room. If you have ever stood still while somebody told you exactly how little you were worth to them and found out in real time that you were calmer than you ever expected to be, then you already know what happened in my chest, right? Then, it wasn't rage. Rage is loud and honest, and it burns itself off in 20 minutes. What I felt was quieter and a great deal worse. It was clarity. 2 years of small things arranged themselves into one shape all at once. Every remark about the shed smelling like varnish. Every time I got seated at the end of the table. Every "we should really talk about your long-term plan." Every check I wrote. It wasn't a run of bad manners. It was a design. It had always been a design. And I was finally holding the drawing right side up, so I did the one thing she was not built to survive. I smiled at her. Not a warm one. I want to be truthful about that. It was the smile of a man who has finally found the rot, knows exactly how far it runs through the frame, and has already decided what he's cutting out. All right, Sloan, I said, and I kept my voice gentle, which I think made it worse. You've been clear. I'll go. I smoothed my jacket. I just won't be going by myself. Her chin came up. Oh? Who are you taking? Clementine? I didn't answer that. I took out my phone. 2 texts, one to Rosie, one to Verna. 4 words in both. Weather turned. Come home. I put the phone in my pocket and looked at my daughter-in-law of about 90 minutes. One last time. Enjoy your party. And I walked out of that corridor and left her standing next to a rack of folded chairs, still tasting her own win, with no idea on this earth that she had just handed a man who builds things a very good reason to take one apart. I'll tell you something. I have replayed that hallway 100 times, and I still don't fully understand how I stayed that calm. I'm not a calm man by nature. Ask anybody who's worked for me. I think what happened is that some part of me had already been waiting 2 years for her to finally say it out loud, and when she did, there was relief in it. There was nothing left to wonder about. If I had shouted, I'd have lost. I'd have been the crazy old man on somebody's phone screen by 11, and the whole story would have been rewritten with me as the villain by Sunday supper. 9 words and out the door. That restraint is the only reason the rest of this worked. I found Verna first. She already had her earpiece out. She said nothing at all, just lifted 2 fingers, and her organist started unplugging, and her drummer started breaking down, and the whole thing happened so smoothly that for about 90 seconds, not one person in that room registered it. Then I walked to the service area, and Rosie was already looking for me. Our eyes met across 40 yards of concrete. He gave me one nod. And then Rosie Pinckney said something low to his crew, and 11 people who had been moving forward all night started moving backward. The wine service stopped. Trays came off the pass and went under foil. Chafing dishes got capped. Carts got loaded and rolled. They did it quietly, and they did it fast. The way people do a thing they have done 10,000 times, and I'll be honest, there was something almost beautiful about watching it. Nobody noticed the food. They noticed the silence. Because music was the bloodstream of that room, and the second it stopped, the whole body went cold. A murmur started near the bar and spread outward, heads turning, People asking each other, "Why is the band carrying speakers out the side door? Where'd all the servers go? Wasn't there supposed to be a dinner?" Nate came running, 34 years old, in a tuxedo, and his face was the color of raw plywood. "Dad, Dad, what's happening? Why is everything stopping?" And I looked at my son, and my heart went sideways in my chest, because underneath that expensive haircut was still the boy who used to fall asleep in the bottom of a skiff with his hand in the water. "Ask your wife," I said. Flat, nothing in it. She told me I wasn't welcome. I'm the one who hired every person in this building. Seemed only right my vendors leave when their client does. Sloane came out of that corridor right then with the last of the smug still on her mouth, and I watched it come apart in stages, like a wave collapsing on a bar. She saw the band at the loading door. She saw carts of food she'd chosen off a tasting menu going out into the alley. She saw Rosie and Verna, standing on either side of an old man in a navy suit, coats on, waiting. Then she looked at me, the obsolete one, the one she'd thrown out 20 minutes earlier. And I want to be precise about the order it came in, because the order is the whole thing. First, she was confused. Then she was frightened. Then she understood. And then Sloane Merrick screamed. Not a shriek. A raw, torn, ugly sound that came up off that concrete floor and hit those 30-foot ceilings and came back down on 140 people holding empty glasses. I turned my back on it and walked out into the wet Charleston air with my two oldest friends beside me. I drove home in a 1994 F-250 with 310,000 miles on it and a bed full of clamps. Over the Ravenel Bridge, harbor black on both sides, the cables going past like the ribs of something enormous. I expected a storm inside me. Grief for my son. Fury at that girl. There was nothing. There was just this big, level quiet. The kind you get in a shed at 4 in the afternoon when all the sanders shut off at once and your ears keep ringing anyway. Somewhere around Coleman Boulevard, I realized that what I actually felt was relief. I'd been living inside a hull with soft frames for 2 years, patching from the inside, telling myself I'd haul her out next season, telling myself the water coming in was condensation. That night wasn't destruction. That night was a survey. And here's the sentence I've never been able to shake, the one that came to me on that bridge. I had been paying for my own erasure, writing checks so my son could afford to be embarrassed by me. If you've ever paid for your seat at a table where you weren't really wanted, and I don't just mean money, I mean apologies you didn't owe, holidays you drove 11 hours for, things you swallowed to keep the peace, then you know exactly what that tastes like. I took the long way home, out along the marsh road. The radio was doing what old radios do. The smell coming through the vent was pluff mud at low tide, and a memory came up whole. It was the first crack, the one I looked straight at and decided was nothing. It was the Sunday Nate brought Sloane out to the yard. 2 Octobers back. I'd made shrimp and rice. I'd hosed down the concrete apron. I'd put a bowl of camellias on the table in the house, because Clem always did that in the fall and I've never stopped. She got out of the car and I watched her look at the place. That was the first sign, and I missed it. She didn't look at the water. Everybody looks at the water. Sloane looked at the property line. She was flawless, not a hair loose, not a thread out of place, and she was polite in a way that was almost impossible to object to. Hands folded, good eye contact, Mr. Waverly, compliments handed over like small gifts. "Nate's told me so much about you. He says you're kind of a legend in the wooden boat world." Right thing to say. Rehearsed, though. I clocked it and let it go. But Nate is the part that still hurts. My son was performing. He laughed too fast at things that weren't funny. He kept checking her face after he spoke, like a man checking a gauge. He took her jacket twice. I had never in my life seen him manage himself around anybody. We walked down to the shed. There was a 22-foot Carolina skiff up on the strongback, half-planked, cedar over white oak, the ribs still pale and bare in the light coming down through the roof panels. I've been building some version of that boat for 40 years. Sloane stood in the doorway and did not come in. "This is amazing," she said. "How many acres is this?" 3 and a little. "Deepwater?" I said yes. "Wow." A pause. "You know what somebody could do with this?" And my son, who learned to swim off that dock, said, "That's what I keep telling him." It's basically the last unimproved deepwater parcel left on this whole stretch. Unimproved. I want you to sit in that word with me for a second, because I have. My wife died in the house at the top of that hill looking down at that shed. Her ashes are in that water off the end of that dock. My son's height is cut into the door frame of that shed in carpenter's pencil, going up in stages, 1997 through 2008, and I could take you there right now and put my finger on 2003. And my only child stood in the doorway and described all of it to his girlfriend as unimproved land. I said nothing. That was my mistake, and I'll say so for the rest of my life. At supper, she went to work, and she was good at it. Every question came wrapped in concern. Nate said, "You've never had it appraised?" "You really should. Not to sell, just to know. It's about knowing what you're sitting on. And later, the taxes on waterfront out here must be brutal now. How do you manage that?" And later still, warm, smiling. "Is the yard an LLC, or is it just in your name? Because there are protections you might be missing." Every question was a sounding line. She was measuring depth, and Nate helped her. That's the part I couldn't get past. He filled in numbers I'd never offered. He brought up the developer's offer from 2019 that I turned down flat without telling anybody the figure, except I had told him, in confidence, at that same table. He was so proud, so desperate to hand this woman something impressive, that he laid his father's whole financial position out like a chart. Now, here is where I have to be fair, and I want you to actually listen to this part, because if I let you turn Sloane Merrick into a cartoon, then I've wasted your time. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove her back from a walkthrough at the venue. Just the two of us, 40 minutes in the rain, traffic stopped dead on 17, and she was tired, and something in her came loose, and she told me about her mother. Her mother cleaned rooms at 2 hotels in North Charleston, and at 53 she lost her house quietly, over 11 months, in a way where nobody at her church found out until the truck showed up. No assets in her name, no leverage, nothing to sell, and nothing to borrow against, and not one person who owed her a thing. Sloane watched her mother get erased by arithmetic, in silence, with her dignity fully intact, and her dignity did not save her. She said one sentence in that truck I've never forgotten. She said, "Being seen is the only insurance that actually works." That's her whole philosophy right there. If enough people know who you are, nobody can dispose of you quietly. That's why the wedding had to be enormous. That's why everything had to be photographed. She wasn't chasing luxury. She was chasing armor. And when she looked at a 67-year-old widower sitting on 3 acres of deep water while his son rented a 2-bedroom off Rivers Avenue, she did not see a family home. She saw an old man being times negligent, times with the only thing standing between her husband and the same slow, quiet ruin that swallowed her mother. She believed she was rescuing him. That doesn't excuse one single thing she did, but it explains how she could do it and still sleep at night. And I'd wager money that some version of that reasoning lives inside somebody you know. The first ask came about 6 months after that supper. Brunch, downtown, one of those places where the plates are enormous and the food on them is not. She put her phone on the table and slid it over to me, and on the screen was a presentation for an app called Threshold, a curated access platform connecting discerning members with bespoke coastal experiences. I read all 11 slides. There were photographs of people doing pottery. The word times, synergy, times appeared twice, and the word times authenticity times 4 times. There was a slide-headed monetization roadmap that contained no numbers. Nate watched me with a bright, manufactured excitement that made me tired. "It's a category creator, Dad. Ground floor. We just need seed capital to start the build." I did not tell them it was a bad idea. I didn't raise my voice. I did what I do when a customer brings me a set of plans. "Who pays you?" I asked. "The members or the people running the experiences?" She started to answer. "And what's your split with them? And what does it cost to run this thing for 24 months? Everything, hosting, salaries, insurance. And how does that compare to the most pessimistic revenue number you're willing to put on paper?" The temperature at that table dropped 10 degrees. "We're pre-revenue," she said, smooth as glass. "Right now it's about community and brand. Monetization follows engagement." "It's like Facebook, Dad," Nate said. "They didn't chase profit either. And I looked at my son, who has a business degree I paid for, comparing a concierge app with no users to one of the biggest companies on the face of the earth, and I knew with total certainty that he was reciting something. I was quiet, a long moment. Then I said, "Send me a written proposal with a number in it." The email came 9 days later. The proposal was just as vague. The number was extremely specific, $60,000. I went into the little office off the shed and wired it, and in the memo field I typed, "Loan Threshold App Development." Then I printed the confirmation, 3-hole punched it, and put it in a new binder. I wrote one word on the spine in grease pencil: record. I didn't know exactly why I did that. I just did. The second ask came 10 months later, and by then Threshold had launched into a silence you could hear. They came out to the house for supper. This one wasn't excitement. This one was engineered panic. The app wasn't the problem, she explained. Awareness was the problem, and her solution was a brand activation week in Positano, flying 9 creators to a villa on the Amalfi Coast to produce content that would drive the platform. It was a vacation with a spreadsheet stapled to the front of it. "Let me make sure I've got this," I said, and I kept my voice level. "You want to fly 9 people to Italy so they'll post photographs, so some number of strangers might download an app that currently has no way of making $1. Nate's face went red. "You don't get it. It's perception. It's brand alignment. You have to spend to make." He was explaining commerce to a man who has met a payroll every 2 weeks since 1983. I asked for a budget. What they handed me listed business class airfare, a private chef, and daily treatments. $85,000. I slid the paper back across the table. "The return on this looks speculative to me, son." And his face fell, and for 1 second I saw the boy who used to bring me his long division at that same table. Then it hardened. He looked at Sloane. She gave him a nod so small you'd have missed it if you weren't watching for it. "Please, Dad," he said. Softer now. Heavier. "This matters so much to Sloane. To us. Don't let it die over a cash flow thing. Us." He picked that word on purpose, and it did exactly what it was built to do. It put a wall up and stood me on the outside of it, and made me the reason my son couldn't be happy. I knew I was being handled. I want to be clear that I knew. I said yes anyway. And a lot of you are going to want to yell at your screen right now. Why did he pay? He knew. Why write the check? Because by then I had already buried my wife, and Nate was the only person left on this earth who shares my last name. When that's your arithmetic, you will pay an enormous amount of money to keep one door from closing. If you've ever kept giving to somebody long past the point where you knew better, it wasn't stupidity. I promise you it wasn't. It was fear of the silence on the other side. I wired it the next morning. Memo line: Loan Positano marketing event. Second sheet in the binder, right behind the first. I wasn't losing money anymore. I was building a file, and some part of me already knew it. Then came the wedding conversation, and that's where the hull finally opened up on me. I'd asked them out for supper, hoping for one honest hour. Afterward, I unrolled a sheet of drafting paper on the table. I'd drawn it myself, in pencil, over 3 evenings, and I'd erased more than I'd kept. A ceremony on the point above the marine railway. Chairs on the grass. Late April, when the yacht's going and the light comes in sideways off the water around 7 o'clock. Rosie doing a proper oyster roast on the apron. Verna, and 3 players on a flatbed trailer. 100 people, I said. Everybody sits down. Everybody eats. Nobody's performing for anybody. Sloane picked the drawing up. She didn't dismiss it. She was far too smart for that. She held it the way you'd hold something a child made for you. "Amos, this is really sweet." Sweet, landing like a drop of something in a glass of water. It's charming. But we have to think about guest experience. And honestly, a backyard wedding at a boatyard doesn't align with the brand we're building. The brand. Her marriage. A product launch. I turned to my son. "Nate, you learned to cast off that dock. Your mother's ashes are in that water." And he would not look at me. He looked at a salt shaker for what felt like a very long time. "It's a little rustic, Dad," he finally said. Then Sloane put my pencil drawing face down on the table. Face down, and I noticed it, and I have never forgotten it, and turned her tablet around. The cistern works. Black steel. Concrete. Glass. "This is the vision," she said, and for the first time that night she sounded genuinely alive. "This says we're a couple that arrived." I looked at the projected cost. It was more than I cleared in my 3 best years put together. "Sloan, that's more than $500,000. A wedding is the promise, not the room. That money is a down payment on a house for the two of you. That's a real keel under you." Last attempt. Final appeal to everything I ever tried to raise him with. And my son looked up from that salt shaker with cold, irritated eyes, irritated that his father was being difficult about this, and said the thing, "Dad, it's just money. We can always make more money. We only get one shot at this impression. It's just money." 4 words. I need to slow all the way down here, because everybody watching is going to skate right past that line, and it is the center of this entire story. I started with a hand plane and $1,100 in 1983. Clem and I lived in the back of that shed for 2 years with a hot plate and a bucket, and I mean that literally. There's a scar on my right forearm from a table saw in 1991 that I can still feel change in the cold. I missed my own mother's last Christmas because a customer's boat had to launch on the 2nd, and I couldn't afford to lose him. Every dollar in my name has a specific, physical, expensive story behind it. Most of those stories hurt. And my only child looked at all of it and called it times just money times, and told me it was worth less than one evening's impression on people he barely knew. Something closed in my chest. I've described it to exactly 2 people. It wasn't a slam. It was a heavy, well-fitted, final sound, like a hatch coming down on a boat that's built right. So I nodded. I looked at that picture of a concrete box and I nodded and I said, "All right, if that's what makes you happy." They read it as a win. It was a surrender. And from that night forward, I documented every single thing that happened. 3 months before the wedding, they came for the yard. Nate called the night before, voice buzzing, saying he and Sloan had been working on something for my future and wanted to present it times properly. That word sat wrong in my ear the whole night. They arrived at 10 in the morning dressed for a board meeting. She had a leather folio. She laid 4 brochures across my table, and the photographs showed silver-haired people playing pickleball and eating salmon at little bistro tables with white cloths. Palmetto Sound, a signature coastal living community. "It's not a nursing home," she said, reading my face before I'd said anything. "It's an amenity-rich community of peers. No more roof, no more taxes, no more getting up at 5 to run a business at 67. It's freedom, Amos." And Nate nodded along beside her, like something on a string. "Think about the upkeep on this place, Dad. The insurance alone out here is insane now. This is just a smart financial move." He said it the way a stranger's financial advisor would say it. I stayed quiet, and my quiet encouraged them, because they read it as consideration. Then she leaned in and delivered the actual purpose of the visit. And here's what makes it work for everybody. She slid a second document across the table, a comparative market analysis. 3 acres. Deepwater. Mount Pleasant. My address highlighted in yellow at the top, and evaluation at the bottom, with a comma in a place I had never seen a comma before. They had already had it appraised, without asking me, months earlier. Then Nate laid out the rest with a casualness that is, to this day, the coldest thing I have ever experienced. "So we sell the yard. That covers your entry fee at Palmetto Sound easily, for life. And the remainder," he took a breath, "the remainder lets me and Sloan finally buy something real, somewhere to raise your grandkids." There it was. The whole drawing, right side up at last. They were not planning my retirement. They were liquidating me. They intended to sell the shed my wife died looking down at, and the water her ashes are in, and the doorframe with the pencil marks, and use the proceeds to buy a life they had not built, and then store me somewhere pleasant until I was finished. I sat there and I stopped hearing the words. I was looking at the structure of it. 2 years of small moves, every one of them aimed at that table on that morning. I looked at my son and I searched his face for one flicker of shame. There was none. He was waiting for my answer, and he looked times hopeful. He honestly believed he had solved a problem, and the problem was me. After a long silence, I pushed their brochures back across the table. "You've given me a lot to consider," I said. "Let me look it over." She smiled a small, satisfied, private smile. They had prepared for a fight. They'd prepared for shouting, for tears, for a scene they could tell people about later. They were not prepared for the flat quiet of a man who has just had his worst suspicion confirmed in writing and is finally completely free to act. They showed me their plan. So I went and built mine. I did not call the family attorney who wrote my will, a nice man who would have poured me coffee and told me families work these things out. I didn't need comfort. I needed a surgeon. Odalis Ferreira practices out of a restored counting house on Broad Street, 1840s brick on the outside, and on the inside, nothing at all. Bare white walls, one long table, a laptop and a single pen. I liked her before she opened her mouth. Mr. Waverly. My intake note says asset protection. Tell me what's coming at you. And I did not open with my feelings. A boat builder doesn't start a survey by describing how much he loves the boat. I set that binder on the table with a soft, definitive weight and opened it. I'm the sole owner of a business and a piece of property, and I'm looking at a hostile takeover from inside my own family. I laid it out in order. The retirement brochures. The unsolicited appraisal. Both wire confirmations with the memo lines. And then the wedding contracts, every one of them billed not to Amos Waverly, but to Waverly Small Craft, LLC. She put on her glasses and read for 11 minutes without saying one word. She read the way an inspector reads a frame, looking for a hairline crack. She tapped the Positano transfer. Any promissory note? Repayment schedule? No. It was a father and his son. So legally, a gift. Not a question. A finding. She moved on, then stopped at the vendor contracts. You billed all of this through the LLC. Was that deliberate? Anything over $10,000 goes through the company. Has since 1996. Something crossed her face for about a quarter of a second and then it was gone. I believe it was respect, and I'll tell you, at that point in my life I hadn't felt any in a while. Then she sat back and steepled her fingers and stopped analyzing and started building. Mr. Waverly. Emotionally, this is complicated. Legally, it's clean. Your son and his fiancée have made one critical error. They've mistaken your generosity for an obligation. Their entire plan rests on an assumption, and an assumption is not a lien. They want to liquidate your land, so we take the land out of reach. I'll draft an irrevocable trust property, improvements, business assets, all of it. You'll be trustee for life. Nothing about your day changes, but you will no longer personally own it, which means it can't be sold to fund your care, and it can't be inherited and flipped. For the money already transferred, I'll draft promissory notes for both amounts, standard interest, sent certified. He'll almost certainly refuse to sign. Good. The refusal is evidence. It establishes that the characterization was disputed, and it documents intent. And this, she tapped the vendor contracts. This is your leverage if you ever need it. Your company is the client. Read Clause 9. I found it. Clause 9. Standard boilerplate. Sitting in every contract I'd signed for that wedding. All services shall be rendered to the satisfaction of the client's designated on-site representative. Should said representative be removed from the premises or withdraw, vendor may deem the engagement concluded and cease all services. And the designated on-site representative, listed on all 11 contracts, was me. I had built my own escape hatch without ever knowing I'd built it. And 3 weeks later, Sloane Merrick walked me into a service corridor and pulled the lever herself. There was no talk of revenge in that office. Not one word of payback. Just the flat application of the law to protect a thing. I walked in with a soft hull, and I walked out with a set of frames cut out of steel. Over the next 3 weeks, I executed it exactly. The trust has a name. The Clementine Waverly Legacy Trust. And its beneficiary, on the day I die, is not my son. It's the Marine Trades Program at the Technical College across the river. The whole property, in perpetuity, operating as a working teaching yard, funding paid apprenticeships for kids out of North Charleston and off the peninsula who want to learn to build and repair boats with their hands. There's one clause in there for Nate, and it's a mercy and a cage at the same time. Nathaniel Waverly has lifetime residency in the house at the top of that hill. He can live there free for the rest of his life. He can raise his children there. He is also personally responsible for 100% of the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the flood policy, and every dollar of maintenance. He will never own 1 inch of it. He can never sell it, never borrow against it, never put a lien on it. I gave my son a responsibility instead of a prize. I signed that document on a Tuesday morning, and I want to be honest with you, it did not feel like revenge. Not even a little. It felt like hauling a boat out before a hurricane. And that brings us all the way back around. Because at 11:40 that night, a little over 3 hours after Sloane screamed in a converted ice house, headlights came up the crushed shell drive at Waverly Small Craft. I was in the shed. I hadn't changed out of the suit. I'd just put a canvas apron on over it, and I was standing at the strong back of that half-planked skiff with a block plane in my hand. Because that is what I do when my hands need something. Rosie was on an upturned bucket. Verna was on a stool by the door with her shoes off. 2 doors slammed out there on the shell. She came in first, and she was a wreck. That $11,000 dress had a brown title stain up one side from the alley. Her hair had let go. Her makeup was down under her eyes in 2 long lines, and she had stopped caring about it, which for Sloane Merrick was the most alarming detail in the entire building. Nate came in behind her holding his jacket in one hand, looking about 15 years old. It came out of her raw, and then it hit the roof panels and it died in the sawdust because a boat shed does not give you an echo. Cedar and oak and shavings and canvas. That room absorbed sound. She had come to make a scene in a building that would not carry her voice, and I don't think she ever fully recovered from it. I set the plane down on the bench, blade up, out of habit, 40 years of habit. I didn't turn around right away. "How could you?" she said. "How could you do that? Do you have any idea what you did to me tonight? Do you understand there were 200 people standing there watching?" Rosie didn't move. Verna didn't move. 2 old people sitting in a shed, absolutely still, and I promise you their stillness did more damage than anything they could have said out loud. "You destroyed my wedding." Her voice broke on the word, wedding, and I have to be truthful for 1 second. She sounded 31 years old and genuinely devastated. And that second is the closest thing to sympathy anybody in that building was going to feel for her. Over a song. Over a Times song. "You vindictive, bitter old man." I turned around then. I looked at her a long moment. Then I looked past her at my son. "Nate, pull 2 of those sawhorses over. You're both going to want to be sitting down for this." Nobody moved. "Suit yourselves. Now here's the thing I want you to picture, because the pace of the next part is everything. I did not raise my voice one single time. Not once. I talked the way I'd talk a customer through a survey report on a boat he loves. Slow. In order. Cheapest problem first, worst problem last. "Let's start with tonight," I said, "since that's what you drove out here about. First thing you need to understand is that I did not pay for your wedding." Nate's forehead creased. "What are you talking about? You paid for all of it." "No, son. Waverly Small Craft Times paid for your wedding. Every deposit, every contract, every invoice, executed by the company as a corporate event. That is not the same thing. Not in business, and not in law." I wiped my hands on the apron. Slowly. Rosie's company, Verna's group, the venue, the florist, the rental house. Every one of them was contracted by my company to provide a service. And in every one of those contracts there's a clause. Clause 9. Services are rendered to the satisfaction of the client's designated on-site representative, and if that representative is removed from the premises, the vendor may consider the engagement concluded and stop work. I let that sit. The designated representative on all 11 contracts was me. The shed got very quiet. Out on the water somewhere, a shrimp boat's diesel was idling. So when your bride walked me into a hallway and told me to get out and never come back, and I looked at her then, and I held it. She wasn't just being cruel to her husband's father. She dismissed the client. She terminated 11 contracts at once, on the client's behalf, in about 40 seconds. I turned my palm toward my friends. These 2 did not walk out for me. They walked out because their client left the building and they were contractually entitled to. They performed exactly as agreed. Nobody breached anything. There's no drama in it at all. I picked the plane back up. It's just business. You taught me that word. I want to stop here for 1 second, because this is the universal part, and it's bigger than one wedding. The person who feels invisible in a family is almost never invisible in the paperwork. Nobody notices whose name is on the deed, the policy, the account, the contract. Everybody notices the seating chart. Sloan Merrick spent 2 years mapping my times assets times and never once read my times terms. She thought power was about who gets to talk loudest in a room. It isn't. It's about who signed the thing that pays for the room. Nate was working on it. I could watch him working on it, hunting for a hole in the wall. Sloan, though, was still angry, because she thought that was my whole move, a petty trick to spoil a night. She had no idea she was still standing in the shallow end. I started cleaning the blade with a rag, and I said it almost conversationally. That handles tonight. Let's talk about the future. You two came out here in March with a very thorough presentation about my times next chapter. Only fair I returned the courtesy. Her chin came up half an inch. Something in her had started to listen properly. Let's talk about the yard, I said. The 3 acres. The ones you had appraised without asking me. Nate flinched like he'd been popped with a rubber band. You were right about one thing. It's worth an enormous amount of money. Far too much to leave sitting in one old man's name. I set the plane down. So 2 months ago I signed it over. All of it. The land, the shed, the railway, the house, the business assets. It belongs to the Clementine Waverly Legacy Trust now. Irrevocable. She laughed. One note. You can't do that. I did it on the 11th of March. That's no, that's Nate's. It has never been Nate's. I kept my voice level. And on the day I die, the trust hands it to the Marine Trades program at the Technical College to run as a teaching yard. Paid apprenticeships. Kids from North Charleston who want to learn a trade with their hands. In my wife's name. Forever. And that is where the color left Sloan Merrick's face. Because irrevocable times, is a legal word. But you do not need a law degree to feel what it means. It means it's done. It means there is no future where that number with the comma in it lands in her lap. She stood in my shed and watched the armor she had spent 2 years building dissolve. No, she said, and it came out almost as a whisper. No, you're lying. I'm not finished, I said. And for 1 second Rosie saw it too. He confirmed it to me later. Hope flared back up in her eyes. She thought a loophole was coming. I made a provision for you, Nate. The trust grants you lifetime residency in the house. You can live there free. You can raise your children there. She grabbed at it. I watched her grab at it. And, I said, as the resident, you are personally responsible for 100% of the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the flood policy, and every dollar of maintenance. You'll never own it. You can't sell it. You can't borrow against it. You can't put a nail in the porch without written permission from the trustee board at the college. I looked at my son. You're not being given an asset, Nate. You're being given a responsibility. I'd have thought that at some point one of you would have wanted one. The hope died out of her face, and what came in behind it was complete comprehension, which is a much worse thing to watch than anger. That's his inheritance, she said, shaking. That is his. No, honey. And here, right here, my voice finally went soft. I know what softness from me sounds like at midnight in that building, and I know it landed harder than shouting would have. It was his birthright, not his inheritance. An inheritance is a thing you're handed. A birthright is a thing you're part of. He didn't have to earn it. He only had to not sell it. She sat down on a sawhorse, just sat down, in a ruined dress, in the sawdust, and put her hands over her face. And I turned to my son, and everything cold went out of me, and what was left was so much sadder. One more piece of business. Dad, the money. His face changed. He knew. Not the wedding. That was a corporate expense, and those books are closed. I'm talking about the $145,000 you and Sloan referred to as my times investment. Those were gifts. Barely audible. That's interesting, because I've never filed a gift tax form in my life. And I don't recall the word gift ever being spoken at any table by anybody. I reached into the apron pocket and took out 2 envelopes and set them on the bench, side by side. You asked me for seed capital. You asked me for an investment. Those are business words, son. Business investments get repaid. I slid them down the bench toward him. 3 weeks ago, my attorney sent you 2 certified letters containing promissory notes formalizing those amounts as personal loans. You refused delivery both times. That's all right. It's noted. These are your copies. He looked at those envelopes like they were live. And this is the moment, not the walkout, not the trust. This is the moment the whole thing landed on my son. Because he finally understood the timeline. This wasn't an old man having a tantrum at a wedding. This had been assembled over 2 years, quietly, in a binder labeled in grease pencil, while he was busy deciding his father was too simple to notice anything. I had been watching the entire time. "You're making me pay it back," he said. "Of course I am. With interest. You've been in default since the 15th. Miss Ferreira will call you Tuesday about a schedule." I'd take the call. And I want to be honest with you, because I don't think what came next was a triumph, and I refuse to sell it to you as one. Watching a 34-year-old man realize he has no floor underneath him, no house coming, no cushion, no phone call that makes it go away is not satisfying. It's just sad. I wasn't enjoying it. Rosie told me afterward that I had one hand flat on that bench the entire time, holding myself up. I stood there in a canvas apron over a navy suit, at midnight, in a building that smells like cedar shavings and linseed oil. And I said the last thing I had. "You called it just money." He didn't answer me. "Your mother and I slept in the back of this building for 2 years. There's a scar on my arm from a saw I got the week you started 3rd grade. Every dollar I ever had came out of something, Nate." I had to stop for a second there. It was never just money. It was just times, hours. And those hours were mine, and you spent them like they were nothing, on one night designed to impress people who left the minute the food stopped coming. I picked up my plane. You talk about my legacy like it's a pile of cash I've been hoarding. It isn't. Legacy isn't what you leave times for times people. It's what you leave times in times them. And I looked at you tonight, and I could not find one thing in there that I put. Nobody said anything for a long time after that. She was crying without making any sound at all, which was somehow the worst part of the whole night. Then I said, "Go on home, you two. I'll leave the dock light on till you get turned around." The marriage lasted 26 days, and I want to be clear about how it ended, because it wasn't a passionate collapse. It was a dissolution. It was 2 business partners turning on each other after a failed venture. She blamed him for not having a handle on his own father, for costing them everything through sheer weakness. He finally saw what was underneath the veneer he'd been performing for, and he could not unsee it. Their whole relationship had been collateral on a loan that got called. She moved out in early June. No drama at all. She's a pragmatist. When a brand fails, you don't stay out of loyalty. You rebrand. He had to break the lease on an apartment they could never afford. He sold the Range Rover at a loss. Miss Ferreira's office sends him a statement on the 1st of every month. Polite and immovable, and he pays what he can against $145,000. He also took a job, a real one. Project coordinator for a marine contractor over in North Charleston, $46,000 a year, and he got it on his own resume with no phone call from me. He hasn't moved into the house on the hill. I don't think he can yet. I think he will. 14 months later, on a clear, cold Saturday in November, we launched a boat, 24 feet, cypress and white oak, built over 9 months by the first apprentice class 6 kids, 4 of them off the peninsula, 2 of them girls, not one of whom had ever held a chisel in January. The marine railway hadn't been used in 3 years, and it groaned the entire way down. The name across the transom, in my own hand lettering, is Clementine. Rosie fed everybody. Verna sang it unaccompanied, and I made it to the 2nd verse before I lost my composure entirely, in front of about 60 people, and I'm not embarrassed about that. And standing at the back of the crowd, past the last of the trucks, in a work jacket and boots, was my son. He hadn't been invited. He hadn't asked me for a thing. He was just there. Our eyes met across 40 feet of oyster shell. I gave him one slow nod. I want to be careful about what that nod was and what it wasn't. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was recognition. I see you standing there. I see you starting from nothing, which is where I started. He nodded back, barely, and he stayed until the boat was in the water, and then he left before the food. So what does all this actually teach, past the drama of it? The lesson most people take from a story like mine is, times cut them off. And I'm telling you that's the wrong one, because I didn't cut anybody off. My son still has a house, and he still has a father. What I did was harder, and a lot more useful. I stopped confusing generosity with love. Those 2 things had been fused together in my head for 34 years. And every check I wrote past the point where I already knew better wasn't love. It was fear wearing love's jacket. Here's the specific thing you can go do today, and it'll take you an afternoon, not a lifetime. Find out whose name is actually on things. The deed, the policy, the account, the business. Not what you assume what the document Times says. And if you have ever handed somebody a significant amount of money and called it a gift out of politeness, write down what it actually was, with a date, and put it somewhere safe. Not to punish anybody. Do it because a clear record is the only thing that stops your story from getting rewritten later by whoever ends up angrier than you. And here's the question I'd like you to sit with. Don't answer it fast. Is there somebody in your life you keep paying in money, in apologies, in silence because you're afraid of what happens if you stop? Now I'd like to hear from you, because this one splits people right down the middle, and I've made my peace with that. Comment 1. If you think I was right, that walking out with those vendors was fair consequence, and that the trust protected exactly what needed protecting. Comment 2. If you think I went too far, that humiliating them in public at their own wedding hurt my son more than it ever corrected anything, and I should have handled every bit of it privately. Comment 3. If you think the real failure happened 2 years earlier, that the moment to speak up was standing in that shed doorway, the day my own son called his mother's home Times unimproved land, and everything after that was just the bill arriving late. And while you're down there, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are right now, because I like knowing who's up with me. And if something like this has happened in your own family, the calculation, the appraisal nobody asked for, the moment you realize somebody had quietly done the math on you, please tell me about it. Not for the algorithm. Do it because somebody is going to scroll past your comment at 2 in the morning and find out they aren't the only one. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while. It means more to an old man than you'd think. I'm still down at the yard most mornings by 6. The second apprentice class started in September, 9 of them this time, and one of them has hands I'd trust already. There's one thing I keep telling those kids, and it's about the only thing I know for certain. Paint hides everything. Water finds everything. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Charleston, South Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.